Okay, so this is going to be a short video about fish scales and how to render them. I'm going to start by listing off the types of fish scales real quick, and then I'll get onto the rendering. First there's the placoid scales, and these are the ones found in sharks, rays, and chimeras, and they're microscopic, so you can't see them. There's cosmoid scales, which are found in the more ancient fish, but some of their descendants still have them today. There's the ganoid scales, which derive from the cosmoid scales. And there's the elasmoid scales, which are probably the scales you think of when you think of scales. They're found in most fish, and they're subdivided into cycloid and stenoid scales. And the difference is that cycloid scales are typically bigger and smoother, and the stenoid scales are smaller and have these ridges and teeth on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the way scales are pigmented or not pigmented in this case. They can either have a pigment or fluorescence or fluorescent stuff on them, as in the milkfish over here, or they can be completely clear, and what you see that is shiny about the fish is actually the skin of the fish rather than its scale pigment. So even among fluorescent scales, it can look very different between fish, or from fish to fish. But what you'll notice is that it will tend to go along with the curvature of the scale. So like in this example right here, the highlight seems to be right above this area. And as the scales go farther and farther away from the center of the highlight, it will sort of start to linger onto one side of the curve of each scale, and then like even in the shadow you can still see some of the highlight there, and likewise in this brighter part the shadow still sort of it's still on one side and sort of blends together in that way. And then over here, like I said, some of them are clear, some of the cycloid scales. So here's an example of that, and this is how the sardines look without any scales, and as you can see they look pretty similar, considering that the skin is what gives them their appearance rather than the scales. Another thing to look out for is other highlights. So besides the fluorescence here, the wetness of the fish is giving it an extra highlight over the surface, and this will change and it'll move depending on where you are relative to the fish, relative to the light. And here it is again. It's a little different here. Like this is more. There's more water with these highlights, but it's the same basic principle. And with non-cycloid scales, the texture it can match. It seems to be a lot like reptile scales in some cases, or like fingernails. The main thing, it just depends on what scales you're rendering. So just look at the reference and take note of the irregularities, because that affects the lighting. And here's another interesting thing that happens. When some fish are wet, it'll give like the same effect that you get with a water reflection, where like the bright part of the reflection will appear on the top, but it'll disappear with like a darker part of the reflection. So the tree line in this case, and this can happen pretty frequently with some fish, unless maybe they're too fluorescent or too bright to tell. And here's an example of a piece of art that renders fish pretty effectively. This is a study of Hawaiian fish by Hubert Voss. And there's not too many scales visible on all of the fish, but the highlights are done really well. And then here's a piece by Frederick Bazille, which is also pretty good. The scales are there. He doesn't overdo the scale, the shading on the scales, but he does the highlights well. The highlights really help to bring out the texture of the scales. And I guess the main thing to consider is that between fish to fish, like even among similar scale types and among similar fish types, similar scale types, there will still be a lot of variance. So you need to check the reference and work based on that. But those are some things to keep in mind when rendering.